Boris Johnson's future looks bleak, but so does the future of some of the world's major economies. Nearly 12 major economies are staring at a recession. This includes the likes of the United States, United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada, and the Eurozone. This is according to a recent report by global agency Nomura. It says a number of major economies will enter a recession within the next 1 year. Right now, central banks have a single mandate. It is to get inflation down, but the tightening monetary policies could choke global growth, thus leading to a synchronized growth slowdown. Recession is technically defined as 2 consecutive quarters of declining economic output. There is no one reason for this, but this time rising interest rates, high inflation, negative consumer sentiment, and supply chain disruptions are aiding recession fears. In the United States, Nomura expects the recession to be shallow but long. It could last for 5 quarters as the central bank focuses all its energies on cooling inflation. In Europe, the slump is predicted to be deeper. It could be further exacerbated if Russia entirely cuts off gas to Europe. For Asian economies, the forecast is dire too. South Korea may take the sharpest hit with a 2.2% contraction. Recession in Japan could, however, be mild due to ongoing policy supports. The only odd one out is China, that is recovering as the economy unlocks. Meanwhile, global growth is projected to slow sharply from 5.7% in 2021 to 2.9% this year. We are now being joined by Greg Swenson, a political analyst and founding partner at Brigg McAdam. Swenson, what is your assessment of the current situation? How likely is a recession at this point?
Oh, I think it's very likely. In fact, you could argue that we're already in a recession. So I think the Nomura report, is accurate. But I don't think it's even just an elevated risk of recession. I think, we're in one. I mean, the U.S., the biggest economy in the world, the U.S. economy was down 1.6% in the first quarter. And all estimates now are pointing to negative growth in the second quarter. I think the Atlanta Fed has changed their numbers or their estimate to minus 1%. And the S&P GMI estimate is minus 1.5%. So I think with the U.S. leading the world into recession, it's really inevitable.
Greg, what would the immediate implications be for the major economies?
Well, I think the obvious ones are the pullback in consumer spending. With elevated inflation and especially higher energy prices. In the U.S., especially in the form of gasoline prices, consumers are being forced to pull back on spending or at least replace some of their typical spending with necessary spending on energy. So I think given that the consumer is 70% of the U.S. economy, it's not necessarily that high in the rest of the world. But with elevated energy prices and inflation in general, I think that recession is either here already or around the corner. And I could also argue that we're already in a recession here in the United Kingdom.
Greg, is there any way for these countries to try and, soften the blow? What can they do at this point?
Yes, I think governments could take a much better role in alleviating inflation. And that's that's the only thing that could keep some of these economies from going into a recession, or at least keeping the recession shorter and facilitating the recovery. And that's by unleashing the supply side of the economies. Obviously inflation is driven by too much demand, too much money in the economy, as well as not enough supply. And so what the governments could do, what countries could do is relax the over-regulation of the private sector, especially in the energy sector, is, pull back on the regulatory overreach, the regulatory burden on companies, and allow the supply side to catch up with the demand side. it's something that's really quite available, especially in the U.S., but in the rest of the world as well, to unleash the supply side by reducing taxes on both consumers as well as on companies, and then reducing the regulatory burden on all sectors, but especially in energy. And that way you bring energy prices down as well as other prices down as you get more supply into the economy.
Greg Swenson, thank you very much for talking to us today. We are also being joined by Andrea from Milan, Italy. He is a geopolitical and economic analyst. Andrea, thank you very much for joining us at this hour. How do you view what Nomura has said? How likely is a recession and how soon?
Well, the idea is that we can think that maybe a recession is already going on. Maybe we can check it later on the third, fourth term of this year. But every element is going to fix the schedule of an incoming recession. We have increasing inflation in the main developed economies. We have problems in trade, problems in energy, semiconductors, chips. We have stopped and disentangled global value chains. We have main problems in geopolitical relations. And we have also plumbing finance with stock markets that are losing almost a fifth of their value all over the world. So maybe the recession will hit hard in the next year. But what about if you think that recession is already there and only data are not capturing it? The main issue is not if, but when we will experience it.
Andrea, is there any likelihood that India will be impacted by global recession fears?
Well, I think India is in a good position to avoid the worst causes and effects of this recession because, first, it's neutral in the war and in the global dynamics that are experiencing rivalries between and among powers. Second, it has a key role of electronic, pharmaceutical, mathematical, financial platform that could be useful both for Russia, EU, United States, and so on. Third, it can use the role of the neutral, far-reaching country that could, for example, be a geopolitical rival of China, but not blocking every commerce, every trade with the People's Republic. It has a very smart approach, and even Italy's Prime Minister Draghi has made us aware of this, recognizing India as a key global player and a key actor for Italy, Europe, and Western powers at the last G7 in Germany. And I think in the next G20 in Indonesia, we will see India as one of the main players in shaping the new global order that we may build up.